Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss some of the real life impacts of the huge increase in the cost of living introduced by the Conservative government. And no, it's not caused by global pressures, it's caused by government policy. That's why it all went up on the same day. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'm not going to express surprise that the government can inflict this level of pain on the country and still expect to do well in elections. I produced a video last week explaining how they can afford this level of cruelty politically. We simply do not have the political system that demands that a Conservative government look after the interests of even a majority of the population. But I do want to look at some of the impacts, because many of you may be like me. I notice the increased costs, but I can also afford them. More to the point, I can afford them without having to cut back on anything. There are others who will have to cut back to be able to manage. It might be something minor, like a luxury, maybe don't spend as much on the annual holiday, but otherwise can live their lives. Maybe they have to be extra efficient with energy, maybe sharing bathwater, wrapping up in blankets instead of having the heating on, a change in the standard of living, but you can cope. But there are some who cannot make any sort of adjustment. There are some who will have to do without what the rest of us would consider essentials, and it can be hard to comprehend. Should also bear in mind that many people who will not have enough money to afford these living cost rises also won't have the knowledge to best manage with what they do have. Someone like myself with a background in maths and science might well cope with limited resources fairly efficiently. I'll have to do without things, but I'll be able to use my resources as efficiently as possible. I can work out ways to reduce my energy use, for example, in a way that minimises the disruption to my life. Someone else may not be able to. And so they may suffer more than otherwise would be the case. They may lose more essentials than maybe should be the case. But I'm going to begin not with a story of privation, but stupidity. Tory Policing Minister Kit Malthouse was being interviewed Friday morning, the day of the price increases. He said he was finding the increasing prices tricky. Oh, bless. And he turned off the heating in his home during the day. He was switching to the log fire to keep warm instead of the central heating, I think was the gist. This is a man on an income in excess of £100,000 a year. He was basically saying that even someone on over 3 times the national average income cannot cope with the cost of living with a Tory government. And bear in mind, he gets to claim expenses for energy use. How bad must things be for a Tory minister on a very high salary with expenses paid from our taxes to say that even they cannot cope with the cost of Tory policies? And what did they think that they were demonstrating with this revelation? Were they trying to sound relatable? They came across to me as being even more callous. This isn't just an idiot that's too thick to understand the budgetary impossibility of millions of households in the UK. What do you mean you can't cope? Just cut back. He is someone who must know he earns many more times the lowest income workers, saying that even he can't cope without cutting back. How on earth does he imagine those on the lowest incomes cope? Especially as those on the lowest incomes who are being squeezed the hardest. Absolutely made my blood boil to hear this nonsense. And in terms of those who really do have problems affording Tory policies, we already saw reports last month of people turning down food like potatoes at food banks because they couldn't afford the energy to cook them. That'll be particularly problematic if your cookers are all electric as well. Like gas right now will be way cheaper, more efficient, cheaper. But if you have an electric stove, it's not a choice you're facing, is it? Oh, I'll cook on the gas stove instead of the electric stove then. If you've got electric, you've got electric. And bear in mind that they were doing this a few weeks ago. That was before their energy bills and everything else massively increased. In fact, never mind the oft quoted figure of 54% price cap increase for energy. That's an average. Some people are seeing their bills increase by much more than that, double or more. What's the betting that energy companies will be posting huge profits again after this year? Because that's what gets me as well. If the cause was entirely down to those global pressures, a term the Tories like using a lot, then what would happen is they'd put up their prices to take account of that. Maybe even not the full price. For example, when costs of food imports have gone up, for example, to be fair, supermarkets haven't actually whacked up their prices to completely cover it. They've covered some of it themselves. So what we'd see with a similar thing is energy company shareholders feeling the pinch a little bit as well. That's what we would see. But not only will the profits be completely protected, they will doubtless increase as well. In fact, with government excusing the rising cost of living by blaming external factors over which they say nobody's got any control, they're actually giving the green light to any companies with enough greed to increase their prices beyond what is strictly necessary to manage their extra costs. I've already seen reports, for example, slight tangent, petrol stations not passing on the full 5p cut in fuel duty to the consumer. I noticed, for example, my local petrol station, the price went down by 4p. So they're keeping a penny for themselves of what is a tax cut. So they basically put the price up by a penny on the sneakily. So because the government won't be honest with the public, and nor will most of the mainstream media, the cost of living has actually increased even more than would have been the case, even without help from the Treasury, because it's now open season on the poor. Now, I saw it reported that energy boss Bill Bullen of Utilita saying that he feared that this will kill the elderly and vulnerable. He said he fears it will be much worse next winter. And of course it will. Of course it will. Because not only is the price cap expected to go up yet again this autumn, and that will be the start of the cold season, not coming to the end of it. He also said he was worried that people might take extreme risks like putting open fires in their homes, barbecues and the like, in order to keep warm, which would of course present a huge hazard in terms of fire and carbon monoxide. But you can also understand the desperation some people may find themselves in. I remember my grandmother. She was the widow of a miner. Even after my granddad died, she got her delivery of coal each week, which she then used for the fire. That's part of the pension. Then they decided they weren't going to do that anymore. So they installed a gas fire and gave her a payment towards the costs instead. Whatever it was, I can't remember. She hated it. It stressed her out. Because with the coal, she knew where she was. She could see it. It was physical. I've got this much coal left. She could see it. She could ration it to make it last. That was fine. With the gas, she didn't know how much she was spending. And she was poor. She died a few months later. Now, it occurred to me that the stress of this may well have contributed. But imagine the situation for someone who was only just managing. I mean, only just managing. They're not being lavish with the groceries. They're getting the basics. They're getting all the cheaper end of things. They didn't have lights on that weren't needed. They were using up shoes and clothes until they literally fell apart before replacing them. And only clothes that were essential, nothing special for occasions that they can't afford to go out for anyway. Basically people who are just existing, using their meagre income efficiently. Martin Lewis would be proud. Now they're hit with an increase in the cost of energy. As I say, 54% is the average, but many people are reporting their payments being doubled or more. That includes from those who say that their energy company proudly claims that they get all their energy from renewable sources. So why has the price gone up then? Oh, price of oil, but you don't use them. Oh, yeah. Then there's the increase in national insurance. The cap's been raised. So it may or may not affect the person who's just about managing, but don't imagine that it doesn't. Then there's the monthly increases in the cost of food. I've been tracking this year. I wish I'd tracked it last year. I tracked it this year, and every month some items on my list have gone up, including staples like milk, butter, eggs and bread. That's all more expensive than it was a few months ago. Council tax is also going up. That has to happen. Obviously, that costs more each year. They need to put their workers' wages up. That's inevitable. But it's still an extra cost to deal with on an income that has not increased anything like the level of inflation. Water and internet charges have also gone up. Some people have had to cut off their internet, I've seen, altogether, just to cope. And there'll be some people, I'm old enough to have grown up without the internet, that some people may imagine, it's a luxury anyway. I grew up without it. Yeah, it's not a luxury. Bear in mind, electricity and running water, to say nothing of an indoor toilet, were considered luxuries at one time. They're not now. And neither is access to the internet. Without access to the internet, how are you going to make your spending more efficient? How can you search for cheaper providers of services? Because there's lots of things we used to do when I was growing up, you can't do now. If you want to, you go to the internet. It's not even possible to set up accounts with some companies without the internet these days. It's all entirely online. But some had no choice. It was something they couldn't afford. I mentioned Martin Lewis earlier, a man who helps advise people on domestic money matters. Someone put this cost of living crisis quite well when they said, the fact that in the last decade, Martin Lewis has had to go from the guy who tells you who's doing the 2-for-1 deals or how to get a good mortgage rate to here's what you can do to get emergency help to stop starving or freezing to death speaks for itself. In fact, Mr. Lewis himself, in the face of this latest blow, said, and I quote, "I've got nothing left." A short but devastating statement that means there are people now who will not cope. No matter how clever or knowledgeable they are, no matter how disciplined or hardy, they simply cannot cope. It's not possible. And you hear some of the stories of how people's lives are impacted by this state-sponsored impoverishment. I've heard all sorts of stories. People having to use candles to heat up their baked beans. And I cannot help thinking, this isn't even the lowest point yet. If there were a general election this May, maybe there would be hope, but there isn't. So things are going to get worse. The Conservatives have a strategy for the next election. Maximum pain now. Maximum pain. Their hurting is more than they need to, so that they can relieve the pressure a little in 2024 to buy our votes, win another election, then pile the pain back on. It's monstrous. And I'd like to say it won't work, not this time. It's too much. But I don't even know if that's true. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.